remember every minute of those 9 months. How the moment those mighty lungs came screaming into your world. Your world was hers. You remember her kilos, the decimal point of her grams. You'd think that she was growing more with every blink. Your arms still cradle the feeling of her strong heart up and beating louder than any love you've ever known. You remember her skin, every perfect coil of her hair, and knowing without doubt that you'd give absolutely anything for her.
Today we are wrapping up our Mandela Month celebrations, and what a fantastic way to do so with so many people that came out to support our children's celebration. This is a children's celebration with a twist because it is 2021, we are in the middle of a pandemic. On Mandela Day we had to postpone our activities because of the social unrest that was happening in the country, and we thought, let this month end in a big bang. And the people that came out today to support us have really shown what it means to serve like Madiba, have really shown what it means to show the children of South Africa that they are the future, that they matter, that they also are the ones that are going to take us to the next level. So we'd like to thank all our sponsors. We'd like to thank all the people that were here with us to celebrate today, and we look forward to giving out to the beneficiaries the things that we have collected for them, the toys, the sanitary towels, the makeup, the books, the different things that people have given so that they as well can enjoy and know what it feels like to have had Madiba as a champion for children. We ask all of you to continue to serve like Madiba and give like they're yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are almost ready to proceed. So if you would be so kind as just to give us a thumbs up if you're back in the room, almost ready to get going again. Right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We are ready to proceed. I would like to hand over to our MC for the day. Bev, back to you.
Thank you very much, Louis, and welcome back, everybody. I hope that you had a good lunch. And we are ready to kick off the rest of the session. So as I promised you, we have two international speakers with us this afternoon. One is in the US and one is the one from Switzerland. And we're going to head off to the beautiful, beautiful country of Switzerland. It's one of my favorite countries in the world. I was there in Davos not so long ago, and it was absolutely exceptional. And we're here today to welcome Marcus Gloas. I hope I pronounced that right. I don't think that I have, so maybe if you can correct me, that would be wonderful. And he is really going to speak to us about the people element of AI. He brings his 3 decades and passion for innovation and PM practice to his role as project management coach and trainer, helping project leaders and teams to future-proof the way they are delivering and managing projects and driving change in today's fast-paced, high-growth and rapidly changing global environments, to become effective leaders, role models in their practice. His expertise is supported by an executive MBA from the Henley Business School, as well as a number of professional certifications in program and project management. Marcus, welcome, and we are really, really looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Bev. So let me just start sharing. Can someone enable me for sharing? I cannot.
Because you can try now again.
Oh yeah, perfect. Thank you. All right, let me just start this. I hope you can see my screen right now. So thank you, Bev, again, and thank you for inviting me. Really happy to be here. And yeah, as Bev mentioned, I talk about more the cultural people aspects in AI and how basically we have to drive things from a cultural point of view to enable all these practices around AI-powered project delivery. So to start with, I think we're all aware of all this buzz around data analytics, disruptive technology like AI, machine learning, etc. I mean, it sounds all trendy, it is sexy. Everybody wants to jump on it, right? And especially in project management, because it obviously it promises to get or give us insights for improved decision making and also to predict future events with more confidence ultimately and automate a lot of things or activities to get kind of the this heavy duty task away from the project manager so that person can actually focus on something else. Makes all a lot of sense. And accordingly, it makes a lot of sense to use actually project management as a candidate for these kind of technologies. And many organizations have focused a lot on the more technical details, though, what tools and technologies to use and, to implement that as soon as possible. And then they expect us to work just like a tool to buy, right? Like just get it off the shelf, get it in there, right? And then, next Monday, just let flow in the insights for our decision making and we're all good to go, right? That, of course, is not working this way. Because there's a prerequisite to actually provide kind of the right conditions to get the maximum value out of AI and eventually data, because data is the fuel for artificial intelligence, as we know. And especially in project management, I think there are various cultural implications that need to get addressed, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. So to start with is, and to get to the bottom of this kind of, right, let's start with the why. So why, that means why do we even bother thinking of artificial intelligence in project management? What is the need really, right? And why should AI even make a difference to project management? I mean, we know AI is a game changer in many ways, and we see it a lot in different industries and many business areas, etc., and organizations. And yeah, it provides a lot of value, right? But when we think about project management, is project management not mainly about people, interaction with people, leadership? We deal with stakeholders. So mainly these elements that are driven by the human intellect. So the question is, what is the value that AI would bring to project management? Because most of the time, like AI, often we have to think, why is it actually doing this and that, right? And we don't really understand. So the question is, what is the value really, right? And thinking about this, I think we can say project management is all about decision-making, really, right? And of course, making the right decisions. And I think there AI can provide a lot of value. So getting it right in terms of decision-making is, in fact, an art, as it states here, since we rely on information and the right interpretation of data and information, and the right skill to determine the consequences of our decisions. And the challenge that we have increasingly in decision-making, especially in projects, is that it became more difficult over the last years, or basically, with this increase in complexity, uncertainty, so all this VUCA environment that we're obviously living in. And of course, also there's a lot of information to process. I mean, the increase in data is phenomenal, right? And how can we even do that? We cannot, right? With our human capabilities or traditional capabilities. And with that amount of data that goes through, there's a message that we need for decision-making, or generally speaking, the messages that change very fast. Now, what has been valid yesterday might become obsolete today, and we have to actually react quickly and take decisions rather quickly. So we need help for something else to do the heavy lifting. And when I say heavy lifting, it's like collecting and filtering information, obviously very fast. In project management, we think about past project artifacts from previous projects, for example, right? Like project schedules, project plans, etc., risk registers, to find some common patterns and give us some insights, what usually we cannot see because we are just limited. So, for example, why are we always late with a certain type of project? What kind of risks are we usually facing? What kind of solutions we would apply usually for this kind of scenarios, etc., etc. So AI can help to make use of this huge amount of data and provide insights to get better with our decision making. And to illustrate that a little bit more, I mean, we leverage already technology in many, many places and areas. So this is one example, right? In the car, we use our navigation systems we are all familiar with, right? And why are we doing this? We want to become more effective. We don't want to just look up streets, directions, etc. We want to just put in, we want to go there, tell us, right? So we need insights that with existing knowledge alone we don't have. And we want to get recommendations based on actual facts or data, not to mention that we are very, very biased. Right? So when we usually say, I will be there in 10 minutes, that's probably not going to work. We may be there actually in half an hour because we're way too optimistic. So based on actual facts or data, that makes a difference because it gives us some reality check, and it gives us some insights, obviously, based on data and facts. What would be in this particular case, what would be the best route, right? So we don't want to rely only on intuition and experience in this kind of scenarios. But in project management, when we think back to that area, we are unfortunately operating in many ways or in many areas and many organizations in this old-fashioned mode, which is almost like in a way of hoping for the best. What does it make out of this in terms of project management? We have a risk of schedule overrun because we're not seeing the traffic jams or the roadblocks in front of us. Maybe this whole map is actually even outdated, right? And we have to redirect everything. That may lead to a risk of cost overrun because we need more fuel because for the longer route. And we may have a risk of not even delivering value because we are maybe too late to a certain event where we want to arrive on time, and that then all becomes useless. Or we're ending up in the wrong location in some nirvana, wherever, because the map is outdated or we misinterpreted things, right? So this is obviously what we need to resolve. So we need to reduce the risk and uncertainty that we have and which is increasing in projects. And think about all the information to be digested in a project, right? Like I mentioned risk management, or when we estimate tasks, right? There are a lot of factors that come in, and the more data we have, the more information we have available, but cannot really access because of our limitations, the more problematic things are becoming in projects. So AI can help by collecting the necessary data and information towards a data-informed decision-making approach and making ultimately a sound judgment call. And that, as I said, it can mean historical information about certain type of projects and can filter data, makes assessment, finds patterns, and comes up with certain options based on simulated scenarios and does a recommendation. I would recommend this, right? And AI can help to discover and collect all that relevant information. And that will certainly reduce the risk of wrong decisions. And we will reach decisions much sooner because of the speed of AI algorithms. But we heard already in other presentations today that AI cannot answer all the questions, right? Decision-making should not be done by a machine alone for many decisions. They're obviously trivial decisions, but others are more complex. So the human input, generally speaking, is still required in project management. And that's where the combination has to come in, where we take recommendations, just like we do in the normal navigation systems in the car. We take that information and then we process it and feed something else in from our own experience and intuition, and then actually make really a judgment call. Because in projects, we are still dealing with people, right? It's very, very much people-driven. People who have emotions, who need to be led and managed, etc. But AI can really build the foundation to ensure that the human judgment is actually based on all relevant information, so that really we have some data-informed decision-making ultimately established. So that is ultimately similar to the navigation systems that I've shown before. And that means eventually that we need to effectively marry these two forms of intelligence, right? We have that fact-based analysis on one side, and we have the human-centric input on the other. Both forms have its limitations. Now, AI has gaps in terms of, for example, leadership or emotional intelligence, and this more people-focused skills, right? And we humans, we are biased. We are very optimistic, as I mentioned before. We're often driven by politics or individual interests, and we have a limit of how much data and information we actually are able to process. So both those elements, so machine and human intelligence, produce insights, and insights ultimately means knowledge. And knowledge, I think, in project management is the highest or the most valuable asset that we have. Because knowledge, whatever we build here out of these two forms of intelligence, and what we come up with as a result, that goes into your next project and probably will be decisive about how your project actually will perform. So really, we have to nurture knowledge and make sure that we actually treat it properly and build up consistently. And as part of knowledge, let me just go here with the next slide. Okay, there's data, obviously, right? That's part of it. And to run the machine of AI, we need data that actually reflects explicit knowledge. Data is really the fuel to artificial intelligence. And that's why also this makes a lot of sense, this comparison here to oil, because it represents the value that data actually has, right? And at the same time, similar to oil, now data in its raw format is rather useless, as at least you cannot really extract the full value in its raw format, right? So it needs to go through some refinery process. It needs to be processed to actually make use of it. But the difference is that processing data is not just a technology thing. You know, AI can locate and collect and process that data, but its value needs to be enabled by people. So I mentioned before, we're looking at project schedules and all these artifacts, right? So data is produced by people. So in project management, we produce all these artifacts. So that means even more, we have to be diligent. We have to be really serious about data, and we have to be skilled up about producing, maintaining, and consuming such data. And that brings me to the aspect of culture, because there are cultural obstacles. And this is from a survey that Randy Bean, and there's a book that he published last year, so that's from a survey here, this number here, that over 90% of leading companies, they see culture as the biggest impediment to becoming data-driven. And another number is actually supporting this. We're all familiar that there's a lot of stuff going on in terms of digital transformations in many organizations. And 70% of digital transformations are failing today. And the number one reason given is culture. So thinking about bringing in AI, and which ultimately also means lifting data and becoming data-driven and these kind of things, when we think about this in project management, we cannot forget the aspect of culture. And what that means to come up with a data-driven transformation ultimately, and eventually implement and also AI practices in project management, it means to address these elements that I've laid out here. So evidence is proven knowledge. So I don't want to label it as data, because evidence is more, right? It's actually based on proven knowledge, and knowledge is data, but it's also human experience and it's intuition, right? So everything that provides actually insights, we use it as evidence in the end, right? But then we have these other elements around that, which is more linked to the culture, to actually enable this kind of evidence to really provide value to project management and our decision-making processes. So that's transparency, truth, authenticity, and accountability. And I will focus on a few right now in this remaining time right now. So one thing, I mentioned evidence, right? And I mentioned project data. So what is project data? I said it already, especially project management data is kind of project schedules. It's all kinds of plans, stakeholder maps. I mean, we're all familiar with all these artifacts in project management, right? And there's a lot of knowledge that is actually thrown away frequently. You know, when a project ends, usually we just, let's move on, next project is coming, right? So we have delivered that project, so what the hell? So we don't really bother. So here's the schedule, just put it on some SharePoint, which I used to call like it's a shredder, because nobody will ever look at this again. And it's somewhere hidden, which we usually call as dark data. So this is obviously something that needs to change, because dealing with this kind of behaviors would mean you're destroying valuable evidence. So we need to maintain it and make sure that actually people follow this approach to actually maintain and keep data so we can actually properly make use of it. The other aspect is about transparency. So the lack of transparency when it comes to project data and information and knowledge, that could be a major blocker. So information needs to actually flow freely through an organization and in projects, but often actually information gets sanitized. Just think about steering committees, right? You know, that message that we're producing there, whatever we want to communicate, it goes through several iterations until it gets actually to the steering committee, gets presented there, and it looks then completely different. I'm not saying that I'm not talking about translating it to business language. I'm saying dropping information because we don't want them to know, right? Because we are feeling uncomfortable because maybe our job is in jeopardy or whatever, right? Or we're on a promotion list, anything, right? So we kind of filter this, right? Or we are holding back information. That links to that slide before, right? Where we just throw data away, or we operating in data silos happens a lot as well, right? On top of it, when we say that we have to collect data and share data and nurture data, right? That means people have to share project data. Are actually people really comfortable with that? Think about this. If you're a project manager and you have all your project artifacts, would you be comfortable sharing all your data publicly for everyone to see? And think about it when not about your project successes, think about your failures. Just think about that, right? If you would be just not, oh, let me run through and see if there's any sensitive stuff in there and I just remove it, just like you would send data out of or externally to a vendor or something, then you just remove some sensitive stuff and black out things, right? You don't usually do that, right? It's obviously what you shouldn't do, right? And things like this need to change. And that links all to the truthfulness of data. That's another aspect, right? How good is actually your data? Projects often have an inconvenient truth that is hidden for various reasons. So I mentioned it already, right? Like someone is maybe on the promotion list, right? So no, I don't want to talk about my problems here because then it will maybe show the gaps that I have here, the problems that I'm having, or any some wrong decisions that were made and all these kind of things, right? Nobody wants to talk about project failures or anything negative. Of course not, right? Everybody wants to talk about success stories, right? Workarounds. Think about this, right? We do a lot of workarounds here and there. Nobody wants to document this in data because it may be not really compliant with organizational policies, but that's the reality, right? And that's something that people have to overcome, or a culture has to overcome. Unfortunately, there's too much focus on people and less on process, because many projects, they fail, not because of people, but because of the processes. But then, people get sent to some meetings where they feel like they're on a trial and have to justify themselves what the hell happened in your project. So these kind of things obviously need to be avoided. So summarizing this, what needs to happen really to drive behavioral and cultural change, there are several elements, right? One is authenticity. And that means to build really that trust and transparency aspect that I mentioned. And that usually requires authentic leadership, to help overcome such barriers. Project leaders need to walk the talk, need to be authentic and also show up as like, I'm not perfect. I do mistakes, right? And they have to share their fears and their imperfections, right? What that does, it unlocks the engagement from people and that comes only from really opening up to everyone on the team. People want to contribute and help that project management makes progress and evolves, and they should not have fear to speak up, right? So that needs to be unlocked through really authentic leadership. And this way you unlock also transparency. It's kind of the truth that sets free really genuine evidence in the end. The second element is purpose, right? You have to give people something to aim for, right? It's not only about organizational performance to get better there. It's also about people to actually have some meaningful work, that they enjoy working in projects. Nobody wants to constantly firefight their way through and just run from one craziness to the next one, right? So that's also something that purpose provides to give kind of some light at the end of the tunnel of underperformance. And that's what we are facing in project management frequently. So there needs to be a change from also a reactive mindset to some more creative mindset where failure becomes a different meaning. And last but not least, persistence. Persistence is really about progressing and improving by reinforcing all these behaviors that I mentioned. It means like always improving, never stop, right? It's like going to the gym. Now you're lifting some weights, right? Let's say you're lifting like 20, 30 kilos or something, right? At some point, it's just like routine, right? But you have to get better, put something more on top of it, right? Because the world is more going forward, right? It's evolving, and we have to be basically in sync with today's complexity and uncertainty. And a good part, coming back to AI, actually, a good part of AI is about learning. And it does not mean that we can right now lean back and let AI do the whole learning thing, right? We should not stop learning, right? And AI algorithms are really only as good as we are evolving in our practices. That's what I think and would like to emphasize here. So persistence in the end sharpens and strengthens kind of also our view in terms of innovation in projects. So coming back to this, and I'm hoping I'm not overrunning too much, that's what I've shown at the beginning. So think about this again, right? Because this image kind of shows or should show the value of AI, right? And we are asking, yeah, what, we're trying to understand AI and how it came up with this, right? Maybe it's not a question to AI, it's maybe a question to ourselves. So because the value of AI and product depends on our willingness to open up in terms of truthfulness, transparency, authenticity. So the question why AI does something is not only a question to their algorithms, how that has been done, but it's primarily a question to ourselves. How good is our data and knowledge? And how accurate and how open are we to share information? And that's for me, for today, it's a short time, but thank you very much for this opportunity here that I got that to share my insight, and I hope it was insightful. I think we move to some questions right now. So back to you, Bev.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, we would just like to ask you to, if you have any questions that you would like to pose to Marcus, to just be so kind as just to drop that in the chat for us as well. Bev and the other moderators will have a look at it as we go forward with regards to this. Bev, are you on the line and available? Otherwise, I'm going to put Tunde on the spot to ask Marcus a question.
No, I'm here. Sorry, I did the 2020 thing and I was on mute. Sorry, Louis. Thank you very much for popping in there for me. All right. Okay.
Bev and Marcus, over to you. Bev, if you can just activate your video.
Much.
Here we go.
I have a saying that says we have conversations with with people all day. Some of them we have with other people, but many of them we have with ourselves, and that's exactly what I was doing. So, Marcus, I think that as we come into this whole conversation, AI has to have a very human conversation. We have to have a very human conversation around this. And we've had a lot of wonderful questions that have come through. We've had a lot of speakers who've posed a number of wonderful things. And I'm reminded of Peter Drucker's comment, culture eats strategy for breakfast. All right. So I think let's start with culture maybe as a big question. And then I'm actually going to revisit some of the questions that have come up earlier in the chat, because I think they are very relevant now. How do we, in this new eye, what are some of the cultural conversations we should be having around the AI question?
Well, I mean, that's basically what I was about to say in my presentation, right? We have to kind of change certain leadership skills. We have to open up. That requires authenticity, and that needs to start actually not with individual person. It needs to start actually with the leadership, right? So project leaders, and needs to basically go up all the ladder. It needs to come from the top, where kind of walks the talk, right? So everybody needs to kind of open up and show that it's. Of course, we don't want to fail, but when we experiment, we fail automatically, right? And in projects, nothing is certain, right? It's we're talking about the future. So I've experienced environments where people are asking, when is that project getting delivered? So they asked some project managers, and then they came up with that and that date. And they thought this is kind of a guarantee, right? And if it's not getting delivered, they get their money back or something, right? Which is completely crazy, because you cannot do that. We are talking about the future. So there needs to be a change in mindset that, and it doesn't affect only the project management team. It affects basically stakeholders, entire organization effectively, right? To make sure that if you want to really progress, if you want to evolve, you have to experiment and you have to be good actually to fail certain things, right? Because failure is ultimately knowledge. And that's what AI can help us with, right? If we just have success stories, then AI is completely useless. So we need the mix out of all kinds of stuff, right? But unfortunately, the culture, many organizations is built up this way that failure is a problem because no, we have performance reviews. And as I said before, right, people get, they are put to trial basically almost, right, where they have to justify in meetings why the project wasn't going as per plan and these kind of things, or they get punished or rewarded based on some project outcomes, which all drives kind of jealousy, politics, this war thing, which is really counterproductive when it comes to bringing in data-driven practices or ultimately AI. So that's where things needs to happen. It's more like a fundamental change, I think, in culture that needs to happen.
I would absolutely agree. A couple of comments that are coming through, which is I think really, really relevant. Keegan, you said project management maturity levels at a 1 and culture deeply entrenched in hiding things in dark corners. I think, you know, this hiding things in dark corners. And his question is, how does a middle manager initiate or drive conversations? He says, as for 2 years, I have been preaching to improve institutional knowledge and truthful data sourcing. Some thoughts around that?
Yeah, that is a tricky part, and it's a very good question. Very, very good question. And I'm working on this as well to actually get this right, because I know that often it comes from middle management where we see the problem because we're really close to the source basically and to the problem, and then you have to explain it to the top why we even why we should care, right? But then, I mean, how I see it. But the question is obviously how you make that actually, or how you implement this kind of approach, right? You have to really show hard numbers, right? You know, if you're talking to steering committees or C-levels, right, at the top, right, then only numbers count, right? We cannot come up with some fluff about like, yeah, we want to improve our project outcomes, right? We want to have truthful data. No, I want to have the facts. What's the outcome, right? I frequently get these questions, right? Now, tell me numbers. We want numbers. What's no, before, after? What's the improvement, right? So that's where we have to run proof of concepts, kind of, right, and collect a lot of data and on how project outcomes actually are and what that means in money, right? When we fail projects, I have a hard time, and you will have a hard time when you go through or do some research to find hard numbers in terms of project failures, because it's not. It is an exercise to do that, right? And especially in one organizations where things are, yeah, a little bit hidden here and there, right? And especially in their own project management space where people are not sharing really their failures. And then we have a hard time actually collecting all that information. In PMOs, I mean, yeah, is a view on milestones. I mean, there's some limited view what's actually happening in projects, and that's where we have to go into. So my approach would be, but it's nothing easy, obviously, is to really do a deep dive in projects with project people, not from a PMO level, just looking at these metrics, the usual metrics, but actually do a deep dive, collect those metrics, and then really run them through, and then show to C-level, to CIOs, etc. Right? We have in this time frame these projects, and these are the failure rates, and these are running over cost schedules, etc. That's the cost that we have because of that, and that will change a thing or two, I would reckon.
Very, very much so. And mindsets, you know, I think, you know, if we look at process improvement methodology, it's right first time. And I think this is kind of built into our DNA. And Bongi poses an interesting question. He said, wow, that was really powerful, referring to your presentation. He says, how do we deal with the preconceived idea that a person is always the cause of the failure rather than the process, especially in public service?
Yeah, the person, yeah. I mean, it starts with, again, that's why I'm saying it's a fundamental cultural shift eventually, because we are having organizations, and I worked in financial services, for example, for quite a while, right? Where it's very traditional. You have the ranks, that you're aiming for. Obviously, you want to get promoted. You have to go through performance reviews and all kinds of things. I think this whole thing about performance reviews and end of year things, right? And I've seen a lot which were completely going wrong. And were completely arbitrary and really useless almost, right? And these are kind of things that have to be changed, right? Because if you continue operating this way, then we have this culture of finger pointing, jealousy, politics, etc. I'm better than you, and so forth, right? And that's ultimately what it is when what leads to some more people-focused culture when it comes to failures, right? So when we look at failures, we cannot just look at, okay, who's the project manager, and then let's get him in here, and then as I said before, he stands in on trial and has to justify what happened, right? Well, actually, the whole process around it is probably flawed, right? I mean, it could be, right? I'm not saying that it cannot be a people failure, but we have to see the whole picture, right? And that's what usually missing. There's too quick, actually, finger pointing on people's issues, right? So that's it's not something that gets just resolved by changing a few things here and there. It's more like at an organizational level how that needs to get resolved. It's a longer journey, that's for sure, and there needs to be some baby steps in between, obviously, right? We can start from project management, but eventually, and I reckon this will happen eventually, because it affects ultimately the whole decision-making approach also in organizations. These kind of things like how performance reviews are done, or this whole concept altogether, it needs to be revised to actually avoid these kind of scenarios where people are kind of being focused on when it comes to failures.
Great, thank you. And I see we had a comment from one of our previous speakers, from Shayla. And I think, Shayla, your comments about learning to embrace failure and the importance of truthful data. I think it's a mindset shift for all of us. And then to come back to the comment about focusing on the person, isn't this what we're seeing on social media at the moment? Is that everybody's playing the man, not the ball. And we tend to go to the blame game. We say, whose fault is it? How do we move away from blame?
Oh, yeah. How can we move away from blame? Yeah, I mean, that again is a very good question. I wish I would have the answer to that. But I mean, you're right in terms of social media, that and linking this to transparency, right? I mean, it's like organizations would try to hide things, right? It's not possible anymore. And we just had just recently famous German tennis player Boris Becker. He got I think a prison time right now because he was hiding things, right? In terms of his assets and all this kind of stuff, right? You cannot do that anymore nowadays. It's impossible because it's all public information almost, right? And it's all shared about in social media everywhere, right? I've seen that myself. I was working with an external vendor in one project, and they had some issues with they were attacked by some malware. And that affected, or potentially was there was an impact on the organization that I was working on. No, we could have been infected by some viruses or something. Nobody communicated anything, but we found out on social media, on Twitter, it was all over the place, right? You cannot hide things anymore. It's impossible nowadays. So if you take these concepts, then obviously you cannot. You have to kind of go forward with transparency also in projects and be more open about, about your failures, about your flaws, your gaps, and where you need to kind of fill some gaps ultimately, right? And so this is kind of almost a must nowadays, right? And I think this example with social media is perfect because that's a trend that we everywhere see, also within organizations.
Very much.
I'm not sure if that answers the question, but I wish I would have an answer in terms of the blame.
Now, the blame game is something that we see all the time. And I think, maybe Evan also in the comments, he raises a good point, which is maybe we need to turn our conversation away from blame into lessons learned. So we don't lose, we learn. And I think if we kind of do that, but I'd like to kind of finish off on maybe a little bit of a more philosophical question that came up a little bit earlier, which I thought was actually wonderful. And I might pose it to the panel again later. Are we giving birth to an alien who does not hold humanity dear?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that. I mean, when we talk about AI, unfortunately, people think automatically about robots, Terminator, Skynet, cyborgs, all this kind of stuff. I heard all this thing all over the place, right? And then the next thing that comes into mind is it taking away my jobs or my role in the organization, right? So this is technology evolution, right? I mean, remember when Microsoft Excel got introduced, right? Accountants were going on the barricades. They say, oh, it's taking away my jobs. They're getting taken over by robots and all this kind of stuff. Well, it actually helped them quite a bit, right? To get the major chunk of work gets actually done and they can focus on other stuff, right? So you cannot imagine anymore an accountant without spreadsheets nowadays. But back then it was like a major thing, right? So I think in a similar way, AI. Obviously, there's some ethical things around this that need to be taken care of. But generally speaking, I don't think we have this kind of issues, at least not in project management.
Wonderful. Marcus, we're only going to say please just hold the space for a bit, because we are going to be inviting you back in a sec onto the panel. Thank you so much for that wonderful talk. There's lots of positive comments in the chat. I think you've really, really added value. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.